Cultivating Calmness Podcast. My name is Kaela Vance, and today I want to talk about analogies. Yes, analogies. What exactly are analogies? Well, I'm glad you asked. They are things that we compare, when we compare two things for the purpose of an explanation for something. So as a therapist, I tend to use analogies fairly often, especially when it relates to trauma, talking about trauma, describing trauma, and the processing of trauma, working through trauma, the healing of trauma, etc. So I find the use of analogies to be very effective. So today I thought I would talk a little bit about that because I actually had a conversation with a client and I came up with an analogy on the spot that I thought really worked for what this particular client was working through, and I felt pretty proud of that. Maybe that was just because it was a combination of other analogies I'd heard before, but in the moment I was like, yeah, I just made that up on the spot and it made sense and it worked for this client. So I'm going to try to share some of that today and some other ones that I have found to be effective. And maybe you will find one or more of these to be effective in understanding your trauma, someone else's trauma, or using them to help your clients. So thank you for joining me today, and we will get started. One of the first ones that usually comes to mind and that I have used on my podcast before and I've talked about before is the example of a car accident when it relates to PTSD and anybody who is experiencing or has experienced some kind of trauma. You can use this analogy when it comes to people that have maybe experienced the same thing but aren't reacting in the same way. You could also use this for people who just are experiencing trauma and they're trying to compare their experience or reaction to somebody else. Like, well, my trauma isn't as bad as their trauma, so I don't know why I'm having such a hard time. And so this is when this analogy comes up. And so the idea of a car accident, I always say, imagine you're driving a car, you're in a car, and there's 4 seats, there's 4 people in the car, and you get in a really bad accident, right? Car is destroyed, people are injured, there's multiple cars involved, there's a lot of chaos, and there's, ambulances and fire trucks and police and people and noise and all of that's going on, right? So let's get to the end and we talk about like what's going on with these 4 people. And I always say one person, right, is more affected by the impact, by the accident itself. And so they may have struggles related to that. Maybe it's I can't drive anymore, or I have to be the driver, I can't be the passenger, I can't drive on freeways, etc. Somebody else maybe has struggles because what was the worst part for them, and that's an important piece to remember. When we talk about trauma, it's the worst part for that person, not what we assume as the person listening to be the worst part. So maybe the worst part for them was all the chaos, right? Maybe as a little kid and they're taken out of the car and they're rushed to the ambulance and they're like, where's my mom? Where's my mom? And there's noise and there's people and I don't see my mom, and I'm worried and I'm scared and I'm hurt. And that is their worst part. And maybe one of the other people in the car, the worst part is that I'm, pretty badly injured and I'm a football player and I'm so badly injured that, the recovery is going to keep me out of this coming up season, and I'm never actually going to be able to play again. And so that's the worst part for me because that was like my hopes and dreams are all in how I was going to play football in college and maybe go professional. And now that's out the window. Maybe the 4th person, right? And like, yeah, maybe I got injured and yeah, this was a terrible accident and it all really sucks. But for me, maybe nothing really stands out as being super traumatic, and I don't appear at the moment, maybe that anything's really, really wrong. Now, those are just 4 examples of potential reactions that people are having to this one incident, right? They were all in the same car experiencing the same accident, and yet they all, in theory, have different experiences. One, because they're all different people, but two, because they were in different places in this car and experienced something completely different and took something completely different away from the same accident as everybody else. So that's the one I probably would say is the most common analogy that I use in therapy, in my podcast, in talking about trauma with people. Now, the one that I used just the other day had to do with a smoke alarm. So what does a smoke alarm have to do with trauma? Well, a smoke alarm, smoke detector is kind of like the amygdala in the brain, and the amygdala serves as like that warning. And so initially, when we first experience a trauma, like that smoke detector goes off, right? The siren, right? And it helps us to alert us that something, bad is happening, and we react, right? But when we've experienced trauma and we've are having like those maybe classic symptoms of PTSD, our amygdala is hyper firing, overfiring, and it goes off all the time for really simple things that we don't need to be alerted about, but our brain and our body feel that we do. Okay, so think about that in this example that I'm using. So my client was dealing with some stuff, and we're just talking about the way they were reacting, and I said, it's like you're trying to cook something, and the thing you're cooking, let's just say it's a piece of chicken, it's in the pan, and it just starts to smoke, and you can't get the smoke to stop, and the smoke, it's just smoking and smoking, and all of a sudden then the fire alarm, smoke detector goes off, but there's no fire, right? You're standing there in the kitchen, you're there with it, you can see that it's not on fire, and I guess that's why they call it a smoke detector, not a fire alarm, but just roll with it. And what you need to do is you need to open the windows, turn the heat off or turn it down, let the smoke clear. Then you can see, you look in your pan, and the fire alarm, smoke alarm eventually goes off, and you can see that your chicken's still there. It's maybe a little crispy, but it's still like raw on the inside. So we gotta turn down the heat so that we can really cook our chicken. So it's like trauma in that when something happens, it's like that chicken is just, that pan, the food you're cooking is just smoking, right? And it's going up and it's billowing, and, you can't get it to stop because maybe we're going too fast. Maybe we haven't used our coping skills, like opening the windows and opening the doors and letting out the smoke, or turning down the heat so that it doesn't continue to smoke. Maybe that means changing a behavior, or backing off when I feel my body doing, the thing it does when it gets upset. So the smoke detector is going off, and we need it to calm down and recognize what's going on, but we also need to recognize what's going on with us and take control. And that the smoke doesn't always mean fire, and that the smoke can almost sometimes prevent us from seeing what we need to see. We need to clear out. And in this case, that was part of the reference that I was making to my client, is that the smoke was kind of overpowering their ability to learn and see what they needed to see in the moment. And we needed that smoke to clear. We needed the heat to be turned down. We needed the fire alarm to be going, to be turned off, so that they could get regulated and they could use their coping skills, and they could move through that difficult moment and make a change. So it made a lot more sense maybe in the moment when I was talking about it with my client. It felt like really right on point. Repeating it never always comes out the way I think it's going to come out. But so it is. I actually used another one which I have used before, but I tweaked it, and I like the way I tweaked it. So this one is what is the how I lose my train of thought. How does a backpack and a Polaroid, what do a backpack and a Polaroid have to do with trauma? There we go, I can speak. What does a backpack and a Polaroid have to do with trauma? Well, we often, maybe you've heard of somebody like wearing a heavy backpack and it's just full of rocks, right? The backpack we're carrying is just full of rocks. And every time, something happens, it's like we've put another rock in the backpack, but we never are letting go of the rocks. We're never taking the rocks out and putting them away. And so what I tell everybody is that I cannot take your memories away. I cannot take these experiences away, nor do we necessarily want to. There is a lesson in them, whatever that may be for you. You're a unique person. There may be some kind of lesson in everything that you've experienced. And that may be that, hey, I never want to experience that again. Or that, I want to learn something from, this bad thing that happened to me so that I know what the warning signs are, so that I know what to be observant of, so I know what to pay attention to so that I don't do that again, or I don't get myself into a situation where that happens again, or I don't, or I do something else, right? So in the past, I've said, like, we want to take each rock out. We want to observe it, feel it, notice it, describe it, talk about it, and then we want to set it aside, right? Place it down by the tree. That's fine. That's a good analogy. I want to take it one step further. I added that it's like we've taken the rock out, we've done all the observing, we've done all this stuff, and then we want to take a Polaroid of it, right? We want to take that picture, and then we want to shake it off, right? Like a Polaroid, and we want to hold on to that Polaroid as a memory of that experience. But what we're trying to get rid of is the heaviness, the burden of that rock. So yeah, we can go toss that rock. We can go put that rock down by the tree. We can go put it in our rock collection and never see it again. But we have that Polaroid. And what we do is we take that Polaroid, we put the Polaroid in our backpack. And over time, when we're processing and working through trauma, we are trying to take one rock out at a time and replace it with a Polaroid. So that backpack's gonna be pretty light, by the time we're done. And over time, right, new rocks may come in, old rocks go out, and we just hope that that burden you're carrying lessens and lessens and lightens over time. And you'll always have those Polaroids. You can choose whether you want to look at them. You can choose whether you take them out, but just knowing that they are there. Those memories are there, but they're not so much of a burden anymore. So I think I really like that analogy, not just getting rid of the rocks that we're carrying, but turning them into something that is that reminder. This kind of leads to the, if you look it up online, sometimes it's called the linen closet. I call it the hall closet or just a closet. Usually when I'm talking to my clients and I'm describing EMDR, I will use this analogy. So what does a hall, overfilled, messy linen closet have to do with trauma and have to do with PTSD? Well, it is like a hall closet. I don't know if you have one. We have one. It is mostly organized, but it, it does have, its messiness to it. But I just say, like, let's imagine that hall closet that's just like full of stuff, and the door, maybe it has a door, maybe the door doesn't close, maybe it doesn't have a door and it's just an open closet, maybe it has a curtain, right? But it's just overflowing with stuff. It's not really organized. It seems pretty precarious when you look at it. Like, you walk by it and things could just fall out at you because the air moved around it, right? Just imagine that kind of closet, okay? So with trauma, that's what it can really feel like, especially people who have a lot of complex trauma or, like compounding multiple traumas that have just, built on top of each other over the years. Well, when we think about that, that's like that messy hall closet, and you maybe want to avoid it because you don't want any more stuff to just be falling out on you. Those things falling out on you are like those triggers, like those memories that come up that you don't want to remember, those things that are causing you to react, for that amygdala to just hyper react to everything that's going on in your life, for, somebody to use a specific tone with you and you snap at them or react, even though there was nothing wrong in what they said. So like when we are processing trauma, we are saying, hey, let's look at this mess And let's slowly take one thing out at a time. We're gonna take it out, we're gonna look at it, maybe unfold it, describe it, feel it, notice it, do everything we need to do with it, and decide what we wanna do with it. Are we donating it? Are we keeping it? Are we throwing it away? Now with our memories, we can't really do that. So really we're just saying, let's organize our closet. So then we're gonna fold this up and we're going to find a place for it on our shelf. It's gonna go way up there, up on the top of the shelf, where I never have to get it if I don't want to, but if I want to, it's nicely folded or nicely put into a box that's labeled and identified, and we put it up there on the top of the shelf, and we get to choose when we want to take it down, if we want to take it down. That's like, we get to choose when we want to remember that memory, when we want to think about that memory, when we want to bring it out. Or if it happens to come to mind, I always describe it as, yeah, that really sucked. That was a terrible point in my life. But I'm so glad that I'm not burdened by that anymore. It's up there where I put it, and I'm not getting it down. And we do that with everything in the closet until we can walk by that closet with ease. That it's no longer, stuff's no longer falling out on us, and we are okay, we are safe. And that includes all the good memories too. So, right, like the towels we need and the things we need, and we can take them out, put them back as we need them, when we want them. And it's not so much of a burden, and it's not causing so many symptoms for us anymore. So that's another favorite of mine. I use that a lot. Let's see here. I got a couple more. So iceberg is pretty common. We use the iceberg analogy for a lot of different things, but a iceberg, if you don't know what an iceberg really looks like, an iceberg has what you see on the top, but oftentimes what's underneath an iceberg is much larger than what you are seeing above the water. And so with trauma, right, what you're seeing are maybe those trauma reactions, whether that's somebody who's shut down or whether that's somebody who's overreactive, all the things that you see. But trauma is really what's under the surface. Like for me, it's like that root cause I'm talking about. What happened to you? What happened in your life? How were you treated? What did you experience? How are people talking to you? That is what we're looking at with traumas. What are all those underlying factors? What's all that stuff that happened before that is causing all these things above the surface to happen? So that's a pretty easy one, and that's often used in other things like anger and like emotions, and we use iceberg to describe a lot of things. So it also works for trauma. And the last one I want to mention today is, what does a scar have to do with trauma? Well, trauma in and of itself is like a scar, but when we experience trauma and we're working on healing trauma, it's like, we have a big gaping wound on our arm, right? When that first happens. But what can happen though is that we never fully heal from the trauma. And so this big gaping wound maybe gets stitched up, but the stitches break open, or we have that tenderness and that soreness, or it gets infected, right? We could think of all kinds of things related to a wound, on our arm. And what we want to do with trauma healing is that we want to address it. We want to treat it. We want to give it the medicine or the ointment or the Band-Aids or the care that it needs to really heal. And what is likely going to be left is a scar. And we're going to have that scar. We're going to be able to look at that scar, and maybe here and there, right, you may have aches and pains related to that scar. But at some point, what we want is for that scar to not bring you a lot of pain and a lot of discomfort, but it is a visual reminder of what happened to you and what you went through. But it shouldn't, and we don't want it to, bring you a lot of pain and discomfort ongoing. A lot of people who have scars may tell you that, yeah, I'm completely healed, I have full use of my arm, nothing's wrong. But every once in a while, when the temperature gets cold, or when certain things happen, or when I hit it in just the right way, right, it hurts. But otherwise, no, nope, doesn't hurt. And that's what we want with trauma healing. That's what we want when you come to therapy and when you work through your traumas and your experiences, is we want to really heal that wound. We want to stitch it up right, put the medicine or the ointment on it that it needs to heal, to cover it up and let it, get the necessary protection. And there's like scar ointments, and we're putting that on so that it's not as visible and it's, doesn't hurt as much. And over time it heals and heals and heals, and it's no longer going to break open. It's no longer going to be hurting you. And that's what trauma work can do, is it addresses where that scar came from. It heals that scar so that you're not being constantly reminded and affected by it anymore. But we can't take the scar away. I can't go back in time and, prevent the accident that happened that caused that scar. But we can work to heal it over time. So I don't know about you, but I'm a big fan of analogies. Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get. That's kind of like what an analogy is. In therapy, I use them all the time. Sometimes I come up with them on the spot. Sometimes I encourage my clients to use them when they're trying to tell somebody else that maybe they care about, to get them to understand what they're going through, is to use analogies to help that person to understand something about them, their experience, in a way that that person might understand. So an example would be if like your husband's a mechanic and works on cars, and you're trying to explain some kind of emotional trauma or experience you're having, and you keep butting heads about it. I would say, hey, see if you can find some kind of analogy related to cars. And I know nothing about cars, but I could probably come up with some pieces and parts and put something together to represent like what I'm trying to get my point across. So I've had people say that has really been helpful for them, because it helps that person connect in a way that they understand. So I would encourage you to do that. If you're struggling to help, get your point across, or somebody just isn't understanding you, sometimes analogies can be really helpful in getting them to understand, because it's